A world without writing is a world without a memory. Our entire civilization rests on a simple but profound invention, the art of record keeping. This is the secret history of how we learn to capture our thoughts, from the first marks pressed into wet clay to the complex ciphers that guarded the secrets of empires. You will uncover the true origins of writing and see how it forged the very foundations of our modern world. Why did a simple receipt for a few sheep ignite a cognitive revolution? How did knotted strings become a powerful language that confounded invaders? We will trace the epic journey of information itself, revealing how ancient systems of documentation shaped everything from our laws to our logic. This story is etched in stone and woven into clay, a testament to humanity's relentless drive to leave a permanent mark. What forgotten form of writing do you think might still be waiting to be understood? Deep within the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet, handprints and charging bison were not just decorations on a wall. They were humanity's first attempts to speak across time. These vivid images served as a powerful external memory, a way to preserve knowledge of migratory patterns and spiritual beliefs far beyond the lifespan of a single individual. This same impulse to record and quantify led to tools like the Ishango bone, a fibula discovered in Africa dating back some 20,000 years. Its series of deliberate notches, arranged in distinct columns, suggest it might have been a primitive calculator or even a lunar calendar. This was not art in the modern sense, but a functional tool. It represents a cognitive leap, the moment we began to offload information from our fragile biological memories onto physical objects. The sheer act of making a permanent mark transformed a fleeting thought into a shared, tangible fact. Why was this step so crucial? As human societies grew from small bands of hunters into larger, more complex communities, the old ways of remembering were no longer enough. Oral tradition could not reliably track the ownership of stored grain, the debts between families, or the intricate movements of the stars. The stage was set for a problem that would demand a revolutionary solution, a new technology born not from art, but from pure, pragmatic necessity. That warehouse in ancient Mesopotamia was a crucible of human progress. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of grain and the damp smell of wet clay. A scribe would take a lump of this clay, shape it into a palm-sized tablet, and with a sharpened reed begin to press. Each impression was a simple wedge, a cuneiform mark. He was not composing a prayer or a law, but meticulously recording that 10 units of barley had been paid, or that 30 sheep were accounted for. These were the world's first contracts, the first ledgers. For centuries, scholars believed writing was born from the lofty ambitions of priests and kings, a tool for glorifying gods and recording history, but the evidence tells a different story. The very oldest clay tablets we have recovered from the city of Uruk are overwhelmingly administrative. They are receipts, inventories, and payroll lists. Writing in its infancy was a technology of pure, practical necessity. It was accounting. This revolutionary system did not appear out of nowhere. Archaeologist Denise Schmant-Besserat pieced together its fascinating evolution. For thousands of years before writing, people across the region used small, geometric clay tokens. A cone might represent a small measure of grain, a sphere a large measure, and an ovoid a jar of oil. To secure a transaction, a person might place a collection of these tokens inside a hollow clay ball, a bulla, and then seal it. The outside of the bulla was often stamped with seal impressions to identify the parties involved. But here was the genius and the problem. You could lock the tokens away for safekeeping, but to remember what was inside, you had to break the container. The solution was as simple as it was brilliant. Scribes began marking the outside of the clay ball with impressions that mirrored the tokens sealed within. Eventually, they realized the hollow ball itself was unnecessary. They could simply make a solid clay tablet and press the signs directly onto its surface. This was the monumental leap. Humanity moved from manipulating three-dimensional objects that looked like things to interpreting two-dimensional symbols that stood for things. A mark on clay was no longer a physical sheep, but the idea of a sheep. This abstraction freed information from the world of objects, allowing it to be rearranged, calculated, and communicated in entirely new ways. The cognitive door had been swung wide open, and through it would eventually flow not just lists of grain, but the entire epic of Gilgamesh. The humble receipt had unlocked the potential for literature, law, and science. But as this new technology spread from the counting house to the temple and the palace, what new forms of power and control would it enable? But with this new power came a new class of professional, the scribe. In the specialized schools of Sumer known as adubas, or tablet houses, students spent years mastering the complexities of cuneiform. They had to learn hundreds of distinct wedge-shaped signs, each capable of representing a concrete object like a bird or a star, or an abstract syllable in a spoken word. This was not a simple alphabet. It was an intricate system of thought, a tool that required immense discipline to wield. The versatility of this system was its greatest strength. It was so effective that it was not locked to one language. Entirely different cultures, the Akkadians, the Elamites, even the Hittites, saw its power and adapted the script to write their own completely unrelated tongues. Cuneiform became the administrative and diplomatic language of the ancient Near East for over 3,000 years. Its most famous monument is the Code of Hammurabi, a towering black stone pillar covered from top to bottom in meticulously carved cuneiform. This was not a list of grain shipments. It was a comprehensive legal code, establishing laws and punishments for everything from property disputes to marital agreements. Here, writing had evolved from tracking sheep to governing human behavior itself. It became the unchanging, permanent voice of the king and the state. For modern scholars, understanding this voice was a monumental challenge. The script was a forgotten cipher for centuries. The breakthrough came with a man named Henry Rawlinson, a British Army officer with a talent for languages. He scaled the treacherous cliffs of Behistun in modern-day Iran to meticulously copy a massive inscription carved by order of King Darius the Great. This inscription told the same story in 3 different languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, all using cuneiform scripts. It became the Rosetta Stone of Mesopotamia. By comparing the known languages to the unknown, Rawlinson and other scholars slowly cracked the code. Suddenly, thousands upon thousands of clay tablets began to speak. We could read everything from royal decrees and international treaties to personal letters, and even the frustrated writings of a schoolboy complaining about his strict teacher. The sheer volume of mundane administrative records reveals the true revolution. Writing had enabled the first large-scale bureaucracy, a machine of governance that could manage the resources of entire city-states and lay the foundation for empires. This system of control, etched in clay, became a blueprint for power that would be copied for millennia. Yet, as one civilization perfected the art of the permanent record, another, on the other side of the world, was developing a system of knots that would prove just as effective and even more mysterious. While the scribes of Mesopotamia pressed their records into heavy clay, a different revolution was unfolding along the fertile banks of the Nile. Here, the Egyptians turned to the river itself for their writing surface, harvesting the tall papyrus plant that grew in the marshes. They would slice its pith into thin strips, lay them crosswise, and press them together, the plant's natural starches fusing the sheets into a smooth, durable material. Papyrus was a technological marvel. It was lightweight, flexible, and could be rolled into scrolls for easy transport and storage. This was a dramatic departure from the cumbersome clay tablet. For the first time, vast amounts of information could be carried across great distances, enabling a new kind of administrative reach for the Egyptian state. But this new surface demanded its own sacred script, one worthy of the gods and the eternal pharaohs. That script was hieroglyphic, a term that literally means sacred carvings. From its very beginning, Egyptian writing was not a tool of commerce but an instrument of divine power. It was believed to be the gift of the god Thoth, the actual words of the gods made visible. You would find these exquisite, detailed pictures adorning the walls of massive temples, the interiors of deep tombs, and the sides of towering obelisks. They were not meant for everyday accounting, but for communicating with the gods, glorifying the king, and ensuring the soul's safe passage into the afterlife. This was writing as monumental art designed to last for eternity. For centuries after the fall of ancient Egypt, the meaning of these beautiful symbols was completely lost. They were a beautiful mystery, a cipher that no one on earth could read. The breakthrough came with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799. This granodiorite slab, inscribed by priests in 196 BC, contained the same decree written in 3 different scripts: Greek, Demotic, and Hieroglyphic. Scholars could read the Greek, and so they had a parallel text, a linguistic key. The French scholar Jean-François Champollion, after years of painstaking work, made the final leap in 1822. He realized that hieroglyphs were not simply pictures representing whole ideas. They were a sophisticated, mixed system. Some signs were indeed logograms, representing a whole word like sun or house. Others functioned phonetically, representing sounds, and some were even determinatives, silent signs placed at the end of a word to clarify its category, like a semantic road sign. Cracking this code flung open the doors to ancient Egypt. We could finally read the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings in the world. We could understand the boasts of pharaohs on their temples and the meticulous records of Nile flood levels that were essential for predicting harvest. The Egyptians maintained vast archives and libraries, and the scribe who managed all this was a revered figure. A text known as the Satire of the Trades extols the scribe's life above all others, listing the miseries of the potter, the fisherman, and the soldier, while the scribe is clean, respected, and powerful. Their civilization was obsessed with legacy, with using the written word to carve their identity into the very stone of history. Yet this very permanence, this focus on the divine and the royal, creates a historical echo chamber. The voices we hear are almost exclusively those of the elite and the eternal. But what about the everyday thoughts of ordinary people? For a writing system that captured the pulse of an entire empire, from the emperor's decrees to the local farmer's tax records, we must travel across the world to the Andes Mountains and a language tied not in ink or stone but in knots. The path to becoming a scribe was a grueling ascent into a world of immense privilege and responsibility. In the humid, dimly lit adabas of Mesopotamia, young boys from wealthy families spent their childhoods hunched over lumps of wet clay. Their days were a cycle of rote memorization and painstaking practice, learning hundreds of intricate cuneiform signs by endlessly copying and recopying standard lists of words, gods, and legal phrases. A single mistake meant scraping the tablet clean and starting over. Discipline was harsh, with teachers known to beat students for even minor errors. This was not an education for creative expression. It was a brutal training regimen designed to produce human calculators and living archives for the state. Across the sands in Egypt, the process was just as demanding. Scribes in training had to master not only the complex picture-based hieroglyphs for sacred monuments, but also the faster, cursive hieratic script used for daily administration on papyrus. Their curriculum was vast, encompassing mathematics to calculate the volume of granaries, astronomy to track the Nile's crucial flood cycle, and the intricate laws of land and tax administration. A well-known text from the time, the Satire of the Trades, drives the point home vividly. It contrasts the scribe's life with the miserable fates of other professions. The potter is caked in mud, the fisherman is prey to crocodiles, the soldier faces a brutal and short life, but the scribe, the text proclaims, is sleek, his hands are soft, and he is freed from manual labor. He is a man of respect who commands others. This was the ultimate reward for years of study, entry into a powerful, exclusive class that formed the very backbone of the state. These scribes were far more than just clerks. They were the accountants who tallied the kingdom's wealth, the diplomats who drafted treaties with foreign powers, the engineers who recorded the architectural plans for pyramids, and the historians who inscribed the deeds of pharaohs for eternity. They held a monopoly on information, and in a world where most were illiterate, this gave them unparalleled influence. The tax collector with his papyrus scroll held power over a farmer's livelihood. The royal scribe recording the law could shape the destiny of cities. Their work required a surgeon's precision, from preparing the perfect consistency of clay to mixing soot and gum into a durable ink. Every document, whether a simple receipt or a royal decree, was a physical manifestation of their skill and authority. The stability of the earliest empires, their ability to collect taxes, deploy armies, and manage vast resources, did not rest on the strength of the king alone. It rested on the literacy, the loyalty, and the diligent, ink-stained hands of this small, elite class of men. They were the unsung engineers of civilization, the human processors who built the bureaucratic machines that we can still glimpse today in the fragile, fired clay and the faded papyrus they left behind. This miracle of writing was not a singular spark, but a fire that ignited independently across the globe. As the empires of Mesopotamia and Egypt consolidated their power, another great civilization was flourishing along the Indus River. Around 2,600 years before the Common Era, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were marvels of urban planning, with advanced drainage systems and standardized bricks. And they, too, had a script, found carved on small, intricate stone seals, often alongside images of mythical beasts. This writing remains one of history's most tantalizing secrets. We have thousands of these inscriptions, but no Rosetta Stone to unlock their meaning. The script is short, with most texts being only 4 or 5 characters long, and it shows no clear relation to any other known language system. Was it a logographic script like early cuneiform? Was it a syllabary? We simply do not know. The most accepted theory is that these seals were used for trade, perhaps stamping ownership on bales of goods or clay door seals. But without the key, the voices of this entire civilization are silent to us. Their thoughts, their laws, their very names are locked away in a cipher we cannot read. It is a stark reminder of how fragile our connection to the past can be. While the Indus Valley script guards its secrets, a different form of writing was emerging in ancient China, born not from commerce, but from a conversation with the gods. The earliest confirmed Chinese writing is found not on clay or papyrus, but on bone. During the Shang dynasty, around 1,200 years before the Common Era, royal diviners would pose critical questions to their ancestors. Would the harvest be bountiful? Was it auspicious to launch a military campaign? They would carefully inscribe these questions onto the polished shoulder, blades of oxen, or the flat underside of turtle shells. Then they would apply intense heat to the bone with a hot metal rod. The thermal stress would cause the bone to crack with a series of popping sounds. The pattern of these cracks was believed to be the divine answer, a message from the spirit world. The scribe would then often carve the interpretation of the omen right next to the original question. This practice, etched into oracle bones, created a permanent record of both the inquiry and the outcome. Over centuries, these pictographic characters evolved, shedding their direct connection to divination to become a versatile script capable of recording poetry, history, and philosophy. This system, with its thousands of characters, each representing a word or concept, would become the direct ancestor of the Chinese writing system used by over 1 billion people today. It is a system with a continuous history stretching back over 3,000 years, a direct thread to the earliest kings who sought answers in the cracks of a turtle's shell. And across the vast Pacific Ocean, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, another independent invention of writing reached breathtaking heights of sophistication. The Maya developed the most advanced and complex writing system in the entire pre-Columbian Americas. It was a beautiful and intricate combination of logograms, which represent whole words, and syllabic signs, which represent sounds, allowing scribes to write with both efficiency and artistic flair. You can see this system in all its glory on towering stone stelae that recorded the ascensions, wars, and cosmic events of powerful kings. They also wrote in folding books made of bark paper, known as codices, which contained vast knowledge of astronomy, ritual calendars, and dynastic history. A Maya text was not a simple line of characters. It was a structured block of glyphs meant to be read in a specific order, a visual puzzle of immense intellectual and aesthetic achievement. They could record precise historical dates and complex mythological narratives with a nuance that rivals any Old World script. The existence of these 4 distinct systems in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica sends a powerful message. Writing was not a single brilliant idea that was copied and spread. It was a cognitive threshold that different human societies crossed on their own when their social and economic complexity demanded it. It was an inevitable evolutionary step, a tool that became necessary for a civilization to manage itself, to remember its past, and to project its power into the future. Yet, for all their permanence, these systems of ink and stone were not the only way ancient societies kept their records. Some of the most effective and mysterious systems of information were not written at all. Yet the sheer complexity of these systems created a powerful barrier. Literacy remained the guarded secret of a small, elite class of scribes, a monopoly on knowledge that sustained their power for millennia. This all changed with one of humanity's most revolutionary inventions, an idea so simple and powerful it would eventually circle the globe, the alphabet. Its origins lie not with kings or priests but with traders. Around 1800 years before the Common Era, Canaanite workers in the Sinai desert mines began adapting Egyptian hieroglyphic principles to write their own Semitic language. They took a hieroglyph for an object like a house, which was called bait in their tongue, and used that symbol to represent not the word, but just the first sound, the B sound. This was the fundamental breakthrough, the rebus principle. A symbol no longer stood for a whole idea or a complex syllable. It represented a single, basic sound of speech. This concept was perfected by the Phoenicians, a seafaring merchant culture whose lifeblood was commerce. Their script contained only about 22 symbols, all consonants. It was lean, efficient, and brutally practical. a Phoenician merchant could now quickly jot down a cargo manifest or a contract without years of specialized training. This simplicity became their ultimate commercial advantage, allowing them to manage a vast trade network that stretched across the entire Mediterranean. Their script was not for recording epic poetry, it was for moving goods and making deals. But this consonant-only system had a limitation. It was like a skeleton without flesh. The reader had to infer the missing vowel sounds from context. Then, around the 8th century before the Common Era, the Greeks encountered this Phoenician script. They saw its potential, but they had a problem. Their language had vowel sounds that were absolutely crucial to its meaning, so they performed a stroke of genius. They took some of the Phoenician consonant signs that represented sounds not used in Greek and repurposed them. For example, the Phoenician letter aleph, which represented a glottal stop, became the Greek alpha, representing the sound. The Phoenician became epsilon for the E sound. With this one adaptation, they created the world's first true alphabet, a set of symbols where every single sound, every consonant and vowel, had its own unique representation. This was a cognitive tool of unprecedented clarity and power. For the first time, the spoken word could be captured with near-perfect precision. This new technology enabled one of the most important cultural rescues in history, the writing down of Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These sprawling stories, which had been passed down orally for generations, could now be fixed in a definitive form, preserving the rhythms and nuances of the Greek language for all time. The alphabet democratized writing. It broke the scribble monopoly. A merchant, a farmer, a soldier could all learn their letters in a matter of weeks, not years. This opened the floodgates for broader participation in every aspect of society, from drafting legal arguments to voting on civic matters. Ideas could now spread faster and farther than ever before. This was not just a new way of writing, it was a new way of thinking, a tool that would fuel the philosophical and political revolutions of classical antiquity and lay the foundational code for the modern world. The grand monuments of stone and papyrus tell only part of the story. For the daily rhythm of life in ancient Athens and Rome, writing was a far more tactile and temporary affair. Picture a Roman schoolboy not with a papyrus scroll, but with a small wooden frame filled with a dark layer of beeswax. With a pointed metal or bone stylus, he would practice his letters, the tip leaving a pale, clean line in the soft surface. If he made a mistake, the flat back of the stylus would smooth the wax, erasing the error and preparing the surface for a new attempt. This was the wax tablet, the reusable notebook of the classical world. It was perfect for taking quick notes in the marketplace, drafting a legal argument, or composing a personal letter. The writing was ephemeral, meant for immediate use, yet it was the medium on which so much daily business and thought was first recorded. For messages or records that needed a bit more permanence, but without the cost of papyrus, people turned to the most common waste material available, broken pottery. These pottery shards, called ostraca, were everywhere, durable and completely free. A citizen might use a shard to jot down a list of groceries or to record a tax payment. But these humble fragments also held immense democratic power. In Athens, each year the assembly would decide if a vote of ostracism was needed. If the people agreed, citizens would gather and scratch the name of the politician they believed posed a threat to the state onto an ostracan. If any one name received enough votes, that individual was exiled from the city for 10 years, a powerful check on tyranny decided by the marks on broken clay. Then there were the lead tablets, thin sheets of soft metal that could be easily folded or rolled. These were often the medium for secret, desperate messages, not to other people but to the gods. Individuals would inscribe curses calling upon chthonic deities to afflict a rival, a thief, or an unfaithful lover. The tablet would then be folded, sometimes pierced with a nail, and buried in a grave or thrown down a well, a direct and private line to the supernatural. These everyday materials reveal a society where writing had seeped far down from the elite. It was not just for scribes and kings. The merchant, the farmer, the housewife, and the common voter all used these simple tools to record, to communicate, and to exert their will. This was a practical, widespread literacy that greased the wheels of complex administration and vibrant social life, proving that the human impulse to document was not a privilege, but a fundamental need at every level of society. These great libraries were the fortresses of the ancient mind. Their mission was nothing less than the conquest of forgetting itself. At the heart of this endeavor was the legendary Library of Alexandria, founded in the 3rd century before the Common Era by the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. Its goal was audaciously simple: to gather every single book in the world. Agents were dispatched to every major port and market with vast sums of royal money, instructed to purchase any and every scroll they could find. Every ship that docked in Alexandria was searched, and any scrolls found on board were confiscated, copied by the library's own army of scribes, and then the copies were returned to the owners while the originals remained in the royal collection. This was a state-sponsored project of intellectual aggregation on an unprecedented scale. The library was more than a warehouse. It was a living university where generations of scholars translated texts, compiled encyclopedias, and advanced the frontiers of geography, astronomy, and medicine. They did not just store knowledge, they actively created it, systematically organizing the chaotic influx of information from dozens of cultures into a coherent whole. This was the ancient world's closest equivalent to the Internet, a single, centralized repository for human understanding. Yet for all its fame, the Library of Alexandria is mostly a ghost, its vast contents lost to us. A more tangible, and in a strange way more fortunate, story comes from a different royal library, that of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal in the city of Nineveh. Ashurbanipal was a unique ruler, a conqueror who was also a devoted scholar, literate in cuneiform and proud of his education. He systematically assembled a library meant to contain all the knowledge of Mesopotamia. He sent his own agents across his empire to collect every significant text they could find, from omen readings and medical treatises to royal correspondence and epic poetry. His collection grew to over 30,000 clay tablets. The irony is that this library's survival is due to its destruction. When Nineveh was sacked and burned by its enemies in 612 before the Common Era, the fire that consumed the palace baked and hardened the very clay tablets that would have otherwise crumbled to dust over the centuries. Buried under the rubble, they were preserved for over 2 millennia until archaeologists unearthed them. Among the charred fragments was the most complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that would have been completely lost to history without that catastrophic fire. This library was not a public institution. It was the private weapon of a king, a tool to consolidate cultural power and guide his rule. In stark contrast stood the public libraries of imperial Rome, like the magnificent Bibliotheca Olpia built by the Emperor Trajan. These were often grand architectural complexes with separate halls for Greek and Latin works, reading rooms, and colonnaded courtyards for discussion. They were open to educated citizens, signaling that access to knowledge was a civic right, or at least a privilege of the Roman elite. These institutions were the data centers of their age, where scrolls were meticulously catalogued, tagged with author and title slips, and stored in labeled pigeonholes or cabinets. The very existence of these libraries, from the royal collection of Ashurbanipal to the public halls of Rome, marks a profound cultural evolution. It was the realization that knowledge was not just a tool for immediate administration or royal glorification, but a precious, non-renewable resource in its own right. It was something that had to be actively hunted, systematically organized, and physically protected against the constant threats of fire, decay, and war. This was humanity's first conscious attempt to build a permanent backup of its own collective mind. But how could a vast empire spanning mountains and deserts manage its information without such a centralized repository? The answer lies not in a building, but in a language of knots. The scroll had reigned for centuries, a dignified but cumbersome master of the written word. But a quiet revolution was brewing in the 1st century, one that would fundamentally reshape our relationship with information, the Codex. Picture the simple practicality of a stack of wax tablets tied together at the spine. This was the humble ancestor of the modern book. Early versions were often just parchment or papyrus sheets folded and sewn together into a single, compact unit. The advantages over the unwieldy scroll were immediate and profound. A codex could hold the contents of multiple scrolls in a fraction of the space, a critical consideration for any traveler, merchant, or scholar. More importantly, it offered the gift of random access. You no longer had to laboriously unroll an entire document to find a specific passage. You could simply flip to the exact page you needed. This transformed reading from a linear performance into a dynamic conversation with the text. Early Christian communities were among the first to recognize this power. They adopted the codex format enthusiastically for circulating their letters and gospels. A single, sturdy codex could contain all 4 gospels, something that would have required 4 separate and fragile scrolls. This portability and efficiency helped their teachings spread rapidly across the Roman Empire, and in doing so, they helped popularize the format itself. By the 4th century, the Codex had decisively overtaken the scroll as the dominant medium for literature and law throughout the Roman world. This was not merely a change in packaging, it was a cognitive shift. The Codex encouraged new ways of organizing thought, with tables of contents, indexes, and numbered pages becoming possible. It made personal libraries feasible, moving knowledge from vast imperial repositories into private studies. This unassuming bound book laid the physical and conceptual groundwork for everything that would follow, from the illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages to the paperback you might hold in your hand today. It was a technological leap that reshaped the very architecture of knowledge, proving that the container for an idea can be just as revolutionary as the idea itself. As the Roman world fragmented, a quiet crisis emerged for the scribes of Europe. The reliable shipments of papyrus from Egypt, the lifeblood of imperial administration, slowed to a trickle and then ceased entirely. Cut off from this ancient resource, the keepers of the written word turned to a more primal, local solution: the very skins of the animals that sustained them. Parchment and its luxurious sibling, vellum, crafted from the treated hides of sheep, goats, and especially calves, became the new skin of memory. This was not a simple substitution. It was a fundamental shift to a material of incredible toughness and longevity. A well-made parchment page could easily last 1,000 years, outliving empires and outlasting the papyrus it replaced. Creating this surface was a grueling chemical art. A scribe or specialized parchmenter would begin with a freshly flayed animal skin, soaked in a vat of lime to loosen the hair and fat. Then came the meticulous scraping, first with a blunt knife to remove the hair, then with a crescent-shaped lunellum to painstakingly shave away every last bit of tissue, thinning the hide to a uniform thickness. The wet skin was then stretched taut on a wooden frame, a hearse where it would dry under tension, the fibers aligning to form a strong, smooth, and brilliantly white sheet. The final step was polishing the surface with pumice to create the perfect tooth for ink. This laborious process meant that parchment was expensive, a premium medium reserved for works of supreme importance. You see this in the magnificent illuminated Bibles of the early Middle Ages, the unshakable legal charters that granted lands and titles, and the royal decrees that carried the force of law across kingdoms. The resilience of this material is proven by the Dead Sea Scrolls, manuscripts written on parchment and papyrus that survived for 2,000 years in the dry darkness of desert caves, their words still legible today. But the true guardians of this durable knowledge were the monks in the Scriptoria of medieval monasteries. In cold, silent rooms illuminated only by narrow windows, these men dedicated their lives to preservation. For hours each day, they would sit at their desks, carefully copying the works of classical antiquity and the foundational texts of Christianity onto fresh parchment codices. They were not merely duplicating words, they were actively fighting against the entropy of the Dark Ages, ensuring that the wisdom of Plato, the science of Galen, and the poetry of Virgil would not be erased by time. Every beautifully inscribed letter was an act of defiance against ignorance, a stitch in the fragile fabric of cultural memory. The shift from papyrus to parchment was more than a change in stationery. It was a declaration that certain knowledge was worth an immense physical effort to save, building a tangible bridge of animal skin and ink that carried the light of the ancient world forward into an uncertain future. Silence was their medium and parchment their sacred ground. In the cold, stone-walled scriptorium, the only sounds were the soft scratch of a quill and the slow, measured breath of a monk at his labor. Each day he would take his place at a carrel, a small wooden desk positioned to catch the northern light, and begin the meticulous work of preservation. His tools were simple, yet the task was immense: a sharpened goose quill, a pot of ink made from oak gall, and a sheet of precious parchment that had taken weeks to prepare. This was not a job, it was a form of prayer, a physical act of devotion. The goal was perfection, to replicate the sacred text before him without a single error, for a mistake in the Word of God was considered a sin. The sheer physical toll was immense: hunched posture, strained eyes, and fingers cramped from hours of precise, unyielding work. A single large Bible, known as a pandect, could consume an entire year of a scribe's life, requiring the skins of over 200 animals. The process was so slow, so deliberate, that it transformed the act of writing into a profound meditation. Why would anyone dedicate their life to such a repetitive and arduous task? For these monks, copying was not merely saving words, it was saving souls, including their own. They believed that every letter perfectly formed carried a fragment of divine grace into the world. And so, in an age of chaos and forgetting, they became the human hard drives of Europe, patiently copying and rebooting the entire operating system of Western civilization. Their work was often adorned with breathtaking artistry, illuminations that transformed the page into a window to heaven. A monk might spend weeks on a single initial capital letter, weaving intricate vines and mythical beasts around the form. He would use pigments gathered from the far corners of the known world: vibrant vermilion from cinnabar, rich ultramarine ground from lapis lazuli carried from Afghanistan, and burnished gold leaf that caught the candlelight like a piece of the sun. These were not mere decorations, they were visual theology, designed to elevate the reader's mind from the earthly text to the celestial reality it described. Monasteries like Monte Cassino, founded by Saint Benedict himself, and the sprawling Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland became fortresses of knowledge. Their libraries grew into the largest in Europe, shelves stacked with codices containing the complete works of Virgil, the philosophical speculations of Aristotle, the medical texts of Galen, and the historical annals of Rome. When a Viking raid or a local war threatened, the first priority was often to save the library, to carry the heavy codices to safety. These monks did not simply store the past, they actively curated it, deciding which texts were valuable enough to dedicate years of labor to copy, and in doing so, they shaped the entire intellectual trajectory of the future. The classical learning that would ignite the Renaissance, the scientific methods, and the legal principles, all survived because of the quiet, devoted scribes in their silent rooms, their hands patiently guiding the light of knowledge through the long, dark night. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire managed a vast territory without a single sheet of paper or a single mark on a clay tablet. Their entire administrative system, the largest in the pre-Columbian Americas, ran on a language of knots. This was the quipu, a complex and beautiful device made of cotton or camelid fibers. At its simplest, a quipu was a main cord from which dozens, sometimes hundreds, of secondary cords dangled like a fringe. But this was no mere tassel. Information was encoded in a rich vocabulary of variables, the specific spin of the yarn, the vibrant colors chosen, the precise placement of each string, and the intricate structure of the knots themselves. A single knot tied in one position could represent the number 10, while an identical knot tied elsewhere might mean 100. The color of the cord could signify the subject, a yellow string for gold, a brown one for potatoes. For a long time, Western scholars were convinced they understood this system. They saw the quipu as a brilliant but limited accounting tool, a three-dimensional abacus used by Inca bureaucrats to tally populations, track tributes, and manage the empire's immense storehouses. It was a numerical database, powerful for its purpose, but incapable of capturing the nuance of language or the depth of a story. This interpretation, however, was incomplete. Recent breakthroughs, particularly by anthropologists like Sabine Heil, and who has worked closely with descendant communities in Peru, point to a far more astonishing possibility. Some quipus, especially those from remote villages, appear to be something else entirely. The way the strings are plied, the combination of colors, and the complex knot patterns may have functioned as a true writing system, a textile script capable of recording genealogies, legal agreements, and even epic poems. The Spanish conquistadors understood the quipu's power all too well. They saw these knotted cords not as simple ledgers, but as the very archives of a rival civilization, objects that preserved a history and a world-view they were determined to erase. In a systematic campaign of cultural destruction, they condemned countless quipus as idolatrous and burned them. Only a few hundred survive today, their meanings largely silenced. The few colonial documents that mention quipus describe royal interpreters, known as quipucamayos, who could read these knotted histories aloud in court. A quipu was not a silent record. It was a performative text, a script that required a trained voice to bring its woven data to life. This challenges our most basic assumptions. We define writing as marks on a flat surface, but the Inca stored complex information in three-dimensional space. We think of text as something we see, but the quipu may have been something a reader also felt, their fingers tracing the knots to unlock the story. It proves that the human drive to document our world is not bound to ink and stone, but can be woven just as powerfully into the very threads of a culture, a mystery waiting to be untangled. That unique impression pressed into clay was a person's legal identity. In the bustling markets of ancient Mesopotamia, a cylinder seal was more valuable than a written name. Crafted from precious stone or metal, each seal was a miniature work of art carved in reverse. Its owner would roll it across the soft, wet clay of a contract tablet, leaving behind a raised, continuous image that told a story, invoked a god, or displayed a symbol of their office. This was not just a signature, it was a guarantee. The intricate, hard-to-forge design made it a powerful tool against forgery. A single seal could authenticate a business deal, authorize a tax payment, or finalize a marriage agreement. Its impression was a binding mark of consent and authority. The concept was so effective it spread across the ancient world. In Egypt, high officials and pharaohs wore signet rings, their distinctive scarabs or cartouches ready to be pressed into a glob of clay securing a papyrus scroll or the lid of a storage jar. In the classical world, a Roman senator's signet ring was a personal emblem of his power, used to seal confidential letters by dripping hot wax over the parchment and then impressing it with the ring's metal face. A broken seal on a document or a container was immediate visual proof of tampering, a breached trust that could invalidate an agreement or launch an investigation. This is why the Seal of Solomon from Jewish tradition was described as a ring of such immense power that it could command demons and speak to animals. The story reflects the profound authority people invested in these small, carved objects. They were the ancient world's ultimate security system, a physical form of cryptography that verified the source and integrity of any record long before the concept of a password existed. They solved a fundamental human problem, how to create trust between people who are not face-to-face. But this system of trust, built on unique physical objects, had one critical vulnerability. What happened when the seal itself was lost, or worse, stolen? The very act of recording a thought creates a new vulnerability, the risk of that thought being seen by the wrong eyes. This primal tension between sharing and hiding gave birth to the art of cryptography, a craft of secret writing that is as ancient as writing itself. The earliest known example comes from the tomb of a nobleman in ancient Egypt, where a scribe deliberately used unusual, non-standard hieroglyphs in an inscription. This was not a mistake, it was a design. By deviating from the common script, he created a message of mystery and exclusivity, one that could only be fully understood by a privileged few initiated into its symbolic code. It was a simple cipher meant to elevate a text from the public square into a private chamber. This drive for concealment took a brilliantly mechanical turn with the Spartans. Their citale was a deceptively simple tool, a wooden cylinder of a specific diameter. A messenger would wrap a thin leather strap in a tight spiral around the cylinder and then write his message lengthwise along its length. Once unwound, the strap appeared to hold only a jumble of meaningless letters, a scrambled cipher. But when wound around an identical cylinder, the letters would realign, revealing the original words. The security of the entire system depended on the enemy not possessing a cylinder of the exact same thickness. For broader, less physical secrecy, Julius Caesar employed a conceptual cipher that still bears his name. To protect his military orders, he would shift every letter in the alphabet by a fixed number of places. If the shift was 3, an O would become a D, a B would become an E, and so on. The message receiver, knowing the key, would simply shift the letters back to decrypt the command. This substitution cipher was elegant in its simplicity, yet effective enough to confound casual observers. The value of such arts was recognized far beyond the battlefield. In ancient India, the Kama Sutra, a text on the art of living, explicitly lists cryptography as one of the 64 essential arts a cultivated person should study, right alongside music, dance, and architecture. It was a skill for protecting intimate secrets and commercial dealings in a sophisticated society. These early ciphers were not just for generals and kings, they shielded the private correspondence of merchants, the hidden formulas of alchemists, and the guarded mysteries of religious cults. The very existence of cryptography reveals a fundamental duality in our relationship with information. From its inception, record-keeping was never just a tool for preservation and broadcast. It was equally a tool for concealment and control. The same technology that could announce a law to thousands could also whisper a secret to a single person, embodying the eternal human struggle between our desire to reveal and our instinct to protect. Parchment was a fortress for knowledge, but its walls were high and its gates were narrow. Its cost and labor confined the written word to the realms of power and the church, leaving little room for the common mind to flourish. Then from the east came a quieter, more democratic revolution, one that began not with animal skins but with rags and fishnets. In the court of China's Han Dynasty, around the year 105 of the Common Era, an official named Kai Lun presented the emperor with a new substance. It was a sheet formed from a pulpy slurry of mulberry bark, old hemp, discarded rags, and even worn-out fishing nets. This was paper. Its invention was a paradigm shift in the very substance of memory. Unlike the laborious scraping of parchment or the fragile strips of papyrus, paper could be made from the most humble, renewable materials. The process was brilliant in its simplicity. These fibers were mashed into a pulp, suspended in water, and then scooped up using a screen that allowed the water to drain away. The leftover mat of interwoven fibers was then pressed and dried into a flat, uniform sheet. It was lightweight, surprisingly strong, and could be produced in volumes parchment could never match. For centuries, this technology was a closely guarded secret of the Chinese Empire, the medium for its own sophisticated bureaucracy and breathtaking art. But knowledge, especially knowledge about how to record knowledge, has a way of escaping borders. Slowly, carried by Buddhist monks and Silk Road merchants, the art of papermaking began its long westward journey. It reached the vibrant intellectual centers of the Islamic world by the 8th century, in cities like Baghdad under the enlightened Abbasid Caliphate, and in Samarkand, famed for its skilled artisans, paper mills blossomed. Islamic craftsmen refined the Chinese process, using linen rags to create a smoother, more durable product perfect for the pen. This was not merely a change in stationery, it was fuel for an intellectual golden age. On this new, affordable medium, scholars could rapidly record and share the astronomical observations of al-Battani, the medical compendiums of al-Razi, and the revolutionary mathematical texts of al-Khwarizmi, whose name would give us the word algorithm. The tales of the Arabian Nights, with their intricate layers of story, found a perfect home in bound paper codices, their portability allowing the narratives to spread like gossip through the bazaars. The very texture of Islamic scholarship, with its emphasis on commentary, translation, and the cross-pollination of ideas, was accelerated by the availability of paper. This river of knowledge and technology eventually flowed into Europe through the conduits of Muslim Spain and the island of Sicily. At first, paper was viewed with deep suspicion by European scribes, derided as a fragile, pagan substance inferior to the noble permanence of parchment. But its advantages were undeniable. The first water-powered paper mills in Italy and Spain began churning out sheets at a fraction of the cost of parchment. Suddenly, the merchant class could afford to keep detailed ledgers. Students at the newly founded universities in Bologna and Paris could buy paper notebooks to capture the lectures of their masters. Town governments could document their laws and tax records without bankrupting their treasuries. This was the true democratization of the written word. Paper pried literacy from the exclusive hands of the clergy and the aristocracy, creating a new reading public. It was the essential, humble precursor, the fertile ground in which a single, world-shattering idea could take root and flourish. The stage was now set for a machine that would multiply the power of this new medium 1,000-fold. A sprawling empire cannot run on charisma alone, it runs on data. The true power of ancient states lay not in their armies, but in their archives, in the mundane, meticulous records that transformed chaotic territories into governed provinces. Take the Roman Empire at its height. Every 14 years, a census would sweep across its domains. Officials would fan out to every town and village, recording the name, age, and property of every citizen. This was not a simple head count. It was a living database that determined tax liabilities and identified every man eligible for military service. The state now knew with chilling precision exactly what it could demand from its people. On the other side of the world, the Qin dynasty in China engineered a similar revolution through documentation. To unify a warring collection of states, they imposed a brutal standardization, all recorded in writing. They decreed a single system of weights and measures, a uniform set of laws, and even a mandatory axle length for all carts so their wheels would fit the same ruts in the imperial highways. This written bureaucracy smoothed the flow of troops, goods, and commands, binding the empire together with the invisible threads of administrative control. The Persian Empire, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Nile Delta, faced the ultimate logistical challenge, distance. Their ingenious solution was the Royal Road, a highway over 1,600 miles long, dotted with relay stations. At each stop, fresh horses and couriers stood ready to carry written dispatches from the king. A message could cross the entire empire in a matter of days, a speed unmatched until the invention of the telegraph. This network of words allowed the Persian court to respond to rebellions, collect tribute, and administer justice with an immediacy that made the vast realm feel small and manageable. Even the Inca, without a single written character, achieved this with their Quipu. Their knot-based records tracked population numbers stored in massive warehouses and the labor owed by every community. This system was so efficient it allowed the state to support massive public works and move armies across impossible mountain terrain without starvation. All of these systems, from Roman scrolls to Andean knots, demanded a massive investment. They required legions of scribes, secure archives, and standardized forms of communication. The archive was the empire's central nervous system, and the humble record was the electrical impulse that carried its will. This was the ultimate technology of power. Writing enabled a central authority to project its influence over thousands of miles, to allocate resources with stunning efficiency, and to maintain order through laws that were now fixed, permanent, and could not be easily forgotten or altered. The ability to remember on such a colossal scale made the empire itself possible, turning the simple act of keeping a list into the most potent weapon of statecraft ever devised. Every library that burns is a universe of thought turned to ash. The tragic fate of the Library of Alexandria is a haunting emblem of this vulnerability, but it was far from an isolated event. Across continents and centuries, the great repositories of human knowledge have faced a relentless assault from fire, war, and deliberate obliteration. When Spanish missionaries consigned nearly all of the Maya codices to the flames, they were not just burning bark paper books, they were systematically erasing a civilization's understanding of astronomy, history, and time itself. Only 4 Maya books are known to have survived that cultural holocaust. In Tudor England, King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries shattered the very system that had preserved classical and Christian learning for 1,000 years. Priceless illuminated manuscripts were torn apart, their parchment scraped clean to reuse for mundane accounts, or simply left to rot in the damp. These losses are not merely the destruction of objects, but the silencing of voices. We know of the existence of dozens of Greek playwrights like Aeschylus and Sophocles only because their names are mentioned in passing by other authors. Their actual works, numbering in the hundreds of plays, are gone forever. What revolutionary ideas, what epic stories, what alternative paths of scientific inquiry have we lost because a single archive was plundered or a single clay tablet archive was never excavated? The historical record we possess is not a neutral collection of facts. It is a deeply skewed sample, curated by the brutal filters of survival. The texts that endured were often those deemed important by the powerful, the orthodox, or the victorious. The mundane records of daily life, the dissenting philosophical tracts, the intricate mythologies of a conquered people, these were the first to vanish. This pattern of loss forces a profound question. How much of our understanding of the ancient world is built on a foundation of fortunate accidents? The quest to recover these lost libraries is a race against time and forgetting. It is the painstaking work of archaeologists sifting through the rubble of Assyrian palaces and the linguistic detectives who spend lifetimes deciphering a single surviving script. Each fragment recovered, each word translated, is a small victory against the silence. It is an attempt to reclaim a more complete picture of our shared intellectual heritage, to hear the whispers of the past through the gaps in our collective memory, and to finally answer what we have truly lost. A world built on memory alone is a world in constant motion. Knowledge in an oral culture lives in the breath, passed from elder to youth through stories and songs. It is fluid, adapting with each telling to the needs of the audience and the moment. There is no fixed version, no single text to point to and say this is the truth. Everything resides within the living, breathing, and tragically fallible human mind. The invention of writing shattered this eternal present. For the first time, a thought could be frozen in time, pinned to a clay tablet or a sheet of papyrus where it could not change. It became an object separate from the person who created it, a statement that could be examined, questioned, and debated days or even centuries later. This externalization of memory triggered a cognitive revolution as profound as the discovery of fire. It allowed for a new kind of critical thinking. You could not logically analyze a story that shifted with every performance, but you could dissect a written law line by line. This gave birth to formal logic, to the concept of a legal precedent, and to the very idea of a verifiable historical fact. The past was no longer just a collection of malleable legends. It was a territory that could be mapped with written records. Yet this incredible power came with a cost that the ancients themselves recognized. The philosopher Plato, through the voice of Socrates, voiced a deep suspicion of this new technology. He feared that writing would make people forgetful, creating a generation that relied on external marks rather than cultivating their own internal memory. His concern was prophetic. Writing did indeed change how we remember, outsourcing vast stores of knowledge to the page, but in return it liberated the mind for higher tasks. It allowed us to stop focusing on mere retention and start engaging in complex analysis and abstract thought. We began to think in more linear, sequential ways, following the very structure of a line of text. This new cognitive style, detached from the immediate, emotional context of a spoken performance, made possible the cold, hard logic of geometry and the systematic observations of science. The transition from ephemeral sound to permanent mark was not merely a new way to store information. It was a fundamental rewiring of the human brain, an upgrade that created entirely new landscapes of thought, from the philosophical inquiries of Aristotle to the legal frameworks that still order our societies today. That simple receipt for sheep was the seed of a global economy. Reliable record-keeping did more than track possessions. It built the very architecture of long-distance trade. For the first time, merchants could venture far beyond their own villages, confident that agreements made in one city would be honored in another. In the bustling markets of ancient Ur, a merchant would press a cuneiform contract into wet clay, detailing a loan of silver to be repaid with interest from a future caravan's profits. This was not just a note, it was enforceable commercial law, a promise frozen in time that created a system of credit and capital. The Phoenicians, those master sailors of the Mediterranean, used their lean, efficient alphabet to manage sprawling commercial networks. Their ships carried not only dyes and glass, but also written accounts and bills of lading that could be understood from one port to the next, building trust between traders who might never look each other in the eye. This written documentation dramatically reduced the risk of doing business. A dispute over a shipment of olive oil could be settled by referring to a ledger, not by relying on faulty memory or shifting testimony. It allowed for the precise calculation of profit and loss, turning commerce from a gamble into a calculable enterprise. The entire machinery of the state depended on this principle. In the Roman Empire, meticulous written censuses and land registers determined exactly how much tax was owed by every citizen and province. This was the lifeblood that paid the legions, funded the aqueducts, and filled the massive horia, the public granaries that fed the city of Rome itself. Without these records, the storage and redistribution of grain on an imperial scale would have descended into chaos and corruption. Writing transformed commerce from a web of personal, face-to-face barter into an impersonal, powerful system. It created a framework where debt, investment, and large-scale organization could flourish, laying the invisible but essential foundation for every market that would follow. The law was no longer a whisper in a king's ear, but a shout carved in stone. Before written codes, justice was a fluid thing, shaped by the memory of elders and the shifting moods of the powerful. A ruling one day could be forgotten or altered the next, leaving the average person with little recourse against arbitrary judgment. The public inscription of law changed everything. When King Hammurabi of Babylon ordered his legal code to be chiseled onto towering stone pillars for all to see, he was not merely listing rules, he was creating a permanent, unchangeable standard. The famous stele, topped with an image of the king receiving authority from the sun god Shamash, sent a clear message. This law came from a divine source, and it applied to everyone, from the highest official to the lowest farmer. A citizen could now point to a specific clause to challenge a wrongful seizure of property, or to understand the penalty for a specific offense. The code covered an astonishing range of daily life, from the price of hiring a boat to the intricate details of inheritance. If a man's house collapsed and killed his son, the builder of that house would be put to death. The law was harsh, but it was knowable. This principle of transparency was echoed centuries later in Rome with the 12 Tables. Plebeians, tired of patrician judges interpreting unwritten customs to their own advantage, demanded the laws be written down and publicly displayed in the forum. This act forced the legal process into the open, making it harder for the elite to manipulate the rules in secret. Court proceedings began to rely on written evidence, contracts etched in clay, and wills sealed with signet rings. These documents created a permanent record of agreements and judgments, a precedent that could be referenced in future disputes. The very idea of a binding contract, a meeting of minds frozen in writing, became the bedrock of commerce and social order. This was the birth of a radical idea that governance should be based on known, impartial rules rather than the transient whims of individuals. It established a framework where society could function predictably, where rights and responsibilities were not just felt but seen. The stone pillar and the bronze tablet were more than monuments. They were the first blueprints for a society governed by law, not by men. the words of the gods demanded a more permanent home than the human voice. Across the ancient world, the same profound shift occurred as cultures moved to capture their most sacred teachings in writing, transforming fluid oral traditions into fixed, authoritative texts. In India, the Vedas, a vast body of hymns and rituals known as Shruti, or that which is heard, had been passed down through countless generations with astonishing verbal precision. But the fear of loss or corruption in an uncertain world eventually compelled Brahmin priests to commit the entire collection to written form, ensuring that every syllable, every sacred sound, was preserved without the slightest deviation. This was not merely transcription, it was an act of profound religious duty, freezing divine revelation in ink and palm leaf. A similar devotion defined the scribes of ancient Israel. For them, copying the Torah was the highest form of worship, governed by an intricate set of religious laws. A single mistake, one misplaced letter, could render an entire scroll unfit for use. The scribe was not an author, but a conduit, and his meticulous work ensured that the covenant between God and his people remained pure and unchanging for all time. This written text became the unshakable foundation of Jewish identity, a portable homeland that could survive exile and diaspora. The power of this new medium to spread a faith is perfectly illustrated by the journey of Buddhism. As monks traveled the Silk Road, they carried not only their teachings in memory but physical copies of the sutras, the discourses of the Buddha, written on materials ranging from birch bark to silk. These texts could be translated, studied, and debated in lands far from the Buddha's homeland, allowing the Dharma to put down roots in China, Korea, and Japan. The written word gave the philosophy a concrete form that could withstand the challenges of travel and time, building a pan-Asian religious community linked by a common library of sacred scripture. In the cold Scriptoria of medieval Europe, this mission reached an industrial scale. The primary task for countless monks was the production of Bibles. Each massive volume, requiring the skins of hundreds of animals and years of labor, was a fortress for the Word of God, designed to last until the end of days. This act of preservation standardized Christian doctrine across a fractured continent, creating a shared textual bedrock for kingdoms that were often at war. A Mass in Rome would be based on the same Latin Vulgate as a Mass in distant Ireland. This textual authority, however, was a double-edged sword. The very act of fixing dogma in writing meant that differing interpretations of the same immutable words could, and did, lead to violent schism. A single comma or a contested translation could become the fault line for a reformation, splitting entire civilizations apart. The written word did not just record religion, it fundamentally reconfigured it, turning local practices into global, text-based faith systems whose influence would be carved into the stone of history itself. A written decree was useless if it could not reach its destination. The true power of ancient empires was not just in the words they wrote, but in the incredible speed with which they could move those words across vast distances. The Persian Empire under Darius I engineered a masterpiece of logistical precision, the Royal Road. This was not a simple dirt path, but a meticulously maintained highway stretching over 1,500 miles from the heart of Persia to the Aegean coast. At regular intervals along this route stood relay stations, each stocked with fresh horses and a ready corps of royal couriers. A single messenger would not run the entire route. Instead, he would ride his stage at a full gallop, hand the sealed dispatches to a fresh rider at the next station, and then rest. This relay system meant the message never stopped moving. The Greek historian Herodotus watched this system in awe, writing that nothing in the world traveled faster than these Persian couriers. His description of their dedication, that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stayed these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds would one day be etched in stone on the facade of New York City's central post office. The Romans looked upon this Persian model and perfected it, creating the cursus publicus. This was the full-blown state postal and transportation service of the Roman Empire, a web of roads and way stations that bound London to Alexandria and Spain to Syria. Officials traveling on state business could use its facilities, and imperial messengers could change horses and chariots at a relentless pace. In the East, the Han Dynasty in China operated a similar and equally sophisticated network of postal stations, ensuring that an emperor's command could ripple out to the farthest provinces. These systems were the ancient equivalent of the Internet, the high-speed data networks of their day. They allowed a governor in Britain to receive an emperor's order from Rome within weeks, not months. They carried urgent military intelligence that could determine the outcome of a rebellion, and they transported the census data and tax records that funded the entire imperial machine. Without this organized circulation of information, the great empires would have fractured under their own weight, their central commands arriving too late to matter. The postal system was the central nervous system of the state, and every sealed scroll was an electrical impulse keeping the entire vast body alive and responsive. That warehouse of recorded data became the first true laboratory. For the first time, a Babylonian astronomer could look back at the celestial observations his predecessor had inscribed on a clay tablet 100 years earlier. He could compare that old data with his own fresh observations, identify a repeating pattern in the movements of Venus, and predict its next appearance with stunning accuracy. This was a revolution in thought. Before writing, knowledge of the natural world was a collection of brilliant but isolated insights, passed down through oral tradition and vulnerable to distortion or loss. Writing allowed for the systematic recording of observations, the slow accumulation of data points that could reveal the deep, hidden rhythms of the universe. Those clay tablets were not just records, they were a permanent dataset, enabling a form of time travel where one generation could directly collaborate with the next. This new power birthed formal science. In Greece, Aristotle did not simply think about biology. He wrote down his dissections of marine life in exhaustive detail. He formulated hypotheses about the natural world, fixed them in ink on papyrus, and created a body of work so comprehensive that it became a foundation for all of Western science. Later scholars in Alexandria or Rome could then read Aristotle, agree with his conclusions, or more importantly, identify where he was wrong. They could build upon his work, refine his ideas, and push human understanding further. This created a great conversation across centuries, a cumulative process of knowledge that simply could not exist without a permanent record. The same transformation reshaped our understanding of the past. Before writing, history was myth and epic poetry, a fluid story shaped by the needs of the present. Then came Herodotus. He traveled the known world, and instead of just collecting legends, he wrote down the accounts of priests, the stories of soldiers, and his own direct observations. He called his work inquiries, and he presented different versions of events, weighing the evidence and allowing for doubt. His successor, Thucydides, went even further in his history of the Peloponnesian War. He insisted on strict standards of evidence, cross-checking eyewitness reports, and rejecting sensational tales in favor of a sober, analytical narrative aimed at uncovering the true causes of human conflict. Writing had given birth to critical history, an investigation based on evidence rather than tradition. This was the ultimate shift. Writing transformed learning from a personal, ephemeral pursuit into a collective, trans-generational enterprise. It allowed humanity to stand on the shoulders of giants not through vague memory, but by reading their actual words. The question was no longer what one person could discover in a lifetime, but what all of humanity, linked by the written word, could discover together over millennia. Our journey from clay to cipher is the untold story of civilization's backbone. What began as a simple receipt for sheep in a Mesopotamian warehouse grew into the invisible architecture of our world. This fundamental technology of record-keeping was never just about memory. It was the engine of accounting and trade that gave rise to law, the scaffold that supported vast religious traditions, the quiet observer that birthed science, and the nervous system that allowed empires to breathe. These fragile tablets, scrolls, and codices were not passive containers. They were active forces as dynamic and shaping as any king or conqueror. They built institutions that outlasted dynasties, created bridges of knowledge across centuries, and allowed you to hear the voice of a Babylonian student complaining about his teacher, a human moment preserved across 3,000 years. Today, we live in the digital echo of that ancient revolution. Our cloud storage and instant messages are the direct descendants of the bulla and the quipu. The same human drive to record our transactions, to assert our laws, to preserve our stories, and to whisper our secrets now pulses through circuits instead of clay. We are all inheritors of this deep history, our lives still ordered by the primal need to make a mark and have it last. The fragile, fired clay of a Sumerian tablet and the glowing screen you now watch are part of the same unbroken chain. If this secret history captivated you, share which ancient system amazed you the most, whether it was the knotted language of the Inca Quipu or the durable paradox of Parchment, in the comments below. And subscribe for more journeys into the profound mysteries of our shared past.